Hi everyone, my name is Victoria Copeland and I pre-recorded this presentation due to my disabilities, so thank you for understanding. This presentation is called From Under the Hatches, Reflections on Dark Surveillance and Resisting Carceral Care Surveillance Assemblages. And it reflects on a collaborative study I conducted with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and the Downtown Women's Action Coalition, or DWAC. But rather than presenting findings, I focus on a methodological contribution, which is an analytical tool used to analyze power as it relates to surveillance and algorithmic harm. As Professor Simone Browne states, if Bentham's panopticon depended on an exercise of power where the inspector sees everything while remaining unseen, how might the view from under the hatches be another site from which to conceptualize the operation of power? I consider this combined analytical tool that I'll be showing you a creation from quote unquote under the hatches because it analyzes power from the perspective of those most marginalized from it. This tool and the project broadly that's referenced was inspired by Simone Browne's concept of dark surveillance, what she refers to as an imaginative space for counter-surveillance, anti-surveillance, and other freedom practices. As Abbey and Akbari argue in the SSN special edition on assemblages, understanding these tensions really helps to reveal the practices that might disrupt, confuse, and break with surveillance systems. Okay, so turning off my video here, before getting into the framework, I wanted to briefly situate the project that I'm reflecting on. So a few years ago, I began collaborating with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and Downtown Women's Action Coalition, which are two grassroots organizations who have long fought against systems of oppression and surveillance within Skid Row, which is a community of largely low-income Black individuals in downtown Los Angeles. And this community has been impacted by urbanization, gentrification, and containment efforts, and as such has been really a testing ground for mass surveillance. And surveillance is carried out by multiple entities. For example, on the screen you can see 3 live feeds of the Skid Row community, which are being played 24/7 by the Weingart Center on their website. And, in more academic terms, we might refer to, this as a surveillance assemblage, but what Stop LAPD Spying Coalition calls it is the stalker state. And so this surveillance assemblage, this stalker state, whatever you might call it, is the context in which our project occurred and part of what influenced the creation of the analytical tool. And so the specific project, we really took a chunk of this stalker state and really honed in on the impact specifically of carceral care surveillance on Black and Latinx mothers in Skid Row, interrogating the role and impact of family separation by the Department of Child and Family Services, or what you all might know as Child Protective Services. And so by carceral care, I refer to specifically in this context the ways in which social work has come to rely on carcerality for the provision of care. The impetus for this study stemmed from testimonies of mothers in the community, as well as the dark surveillance practices Stop LAPD Spying was already engaging in. I wanted to share these videos from a town hall that we held in Skid Row to set the stage for the tool. One set of videos is from Hamid Khan with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and the other is from mother and DWAC organizer Natasha Smith. As you'll be able to tell from the videos, there are so many layers of power and harm going on. And that is what we're going to spend the rest of the time on, is really how to ingest this information. So I'm going to play the videos for you now.
This is establishing that whether you're a complex risk flag, which means that, okay, you're super risk. So we're going to really, it's almost a carceral thing, almost mean putting somebody in jail.
They do it the way they want to. As long as they type and stuff in the computer, that's what they know about it. You come in there a certain day, say certain words, they type it. If you're aggressive that day, they type it. And they're not going to say the day you came in nice. The aggressive part is going to be all over. And that's the way they're going to treat you.
So well, I had to change 3 buses. I had to walk in the rain. I'm coming over here for some support because you're supposed to be a care facility. But then, I'm just trying to come here and I'm like, yo, man, this was really messed up. This was such a bad day. And now all of a sudden somebody says, well, come on, just leave me alone for a second. You're being aggressive. We're going to just put you with a red flag and a target on you. And next thing you know, we're going to separate your family.
I remember when I went to court with my kids, and they told me that if I didn't have a mailing address, that I wouldn't be able to be in the court to get my children. So they took my children that same day because I didn't have a mailing address.
So now here's something else. You criminalize people who, because may not have a mailing address. And this is exactly the splitting target and criminalizing.
Hello, my name is Natasha Smith, and I'm a mother who has been impacted by DCFS. And I just want to say that criminalizing the parents for being impoverished, taking away their children because they are poor, is not the solution. Babies need their mothers. Every day in the Skid Row community, I watch as people are suffering, wandering around in the streets hopeless because they feel they have nothing else to live for. And the worst part about this is that they take our children, they sell them, and then when they're 18, they release them back into the world, lost and alone, with no real true connections to their heritage, with no real true connections to their family or their generational wealth. DCFS needs to be abolished.
So this analytical tool on the screen is what I use for analysis in the project, and it's comprised of 7 non-hierarchical components: the community and community impacts, operational, the structural and institutional, the disciplinary, the interpersonal, and the hegemonic. I did not create these components. They came from a combination of Patricia Hill Collins' Matrix of Domination and Free Radicals and Stop LAPD Spying's Algorithmic Ecology. The Matrix of Domination is part of the Black feminist epistemological lineage and refers to the organization of hierarchical power relations for any society, and it consists of 4 domains: the structural, disciplinary, hegemonic, and interpersonal. The algorithmic ecology, on the other hand, was created by the Free Radicals and Stop LAPD Spying as a framework and tool to analyze and map power by decentering the algorithm and looking at what shapes it. The algorithmic ecology was derived from the organization's organizing work against broken windows policing and carceral surveillance in LA, including data-driven policing tools like Predpol. And this tool, as you can see, is comprised of 4 levels of analysis as well: the ideological, institutional, operational, and community. Now, while the matrix here provides a framework for understanding power dynamics particularly experienced by Black women, the algorithmic ecology is informed by community experiences with and actions specifically against algorithmic harm. I'm going to give a very brief overview of each component of the combined analytical tool, and examples of how this helped with my analysis and our project overall. Again, I'm not really sharing any findings here, but presenting a tool that can be useful for analyzing power, mapping harm, and resisting assemblages. So I begin with the community and community impact domain, or level of power. As Professor Haggerty states, to study surveillance is to trace both long-term and more punctuated transformations in how societies render people and things visible, knowable, and governable. And so the community level of analysis within this combined analytical tool contributes to sort of this understanding of the context through 2 functions, which is 1, contextualizing whatever project we're conducting, including the geography, history, and even the ethical dynamics of a project. And the second function, pulling from the algorithmic ecology, is grounding us in the community impact of whatever algorithm or technology we're studying. So here's a few examples of how I use the community domain of the analytical tool in our project. So for that contextualization piece, I've partnered with my community partners for the whole ethics process and the research design to ensure that the project removed community-driven. And now this context of our partnership was really important, and I think is often disregarded when academics conduct this type of power analyses, but is very essential, and asked me to write a reflection on also the harm IRBs can cause on community members. So that's something that they asked of me. Even when, research began, I analyzed and wrote about the context and history of Skid Row using materials created by the community themselves, personal testimony, and historical documents. So that was sort of that contextualization piece. And second, the community impact piece, So one very brief, small example is that I pulled out specific themes about how, from the data, about how the community was generationally being impacted by family separation, right? So looking specifically at how the degradation of familial bonds permanently shifted the community structure. Mothers describe this phenomenon as dividing and conquering families, or family dismemberment. And of course, this is what Tasha was speaking about in her clip earlier. Again, this is just one example, and this allowed us to think deeply about counter-resistance strategies and what it would look like to repair the harm, including things like reintegration of families, bolstering community power, reparations, other dark surveillance practices. And it also helped us dive into, other domains of power. The next domain of power I focused on was the interpersonal domain. And so Collins describes this domain as the day-to-day behaviors, interactions, and resistance practices of individuals. And as Abbey and Akbari say, we need to account for desires against surveillance. So by looking at the interpersonal, we're really able to see how individuals are impacted daily, but also how they're finding ways to resist. And one example from our project is, in community conversations, mothers would discuss how surveillance was so entrenched into their community that individuals were sort of conditioned to report to CPS, DCFS when issues arose, and would also recommend DCFS, not knowing that surveillance tactics would occur subsequently, like unannounced home visits. And, in addition to that, mothers' individual past histories within the system and even being unsheltered led to their cases being marked as high risk. And that led to actually social workers even double downing on surveillance. So for individual mothers, this really led to, constant anxiety and hypervigilance every single day. One mother stating it haunts you for the rest of your life, quote. And this, again, is just one example, not even including, us diving into social workers and their day-to-day practices. All that to say, the interpersonal level is really about understanding how critical these mundane yet relentless forms of everyday surveillance were to mothers' well-being, and understanding, how this allowed us to interrogate the role individual social workers play in perpetuating domination and surveillance. And also, for me, this domain reminded me to stay present. Mothers found ways to experience joy every single day, despite facing surveillance. And as you can see on the screen here, mothers would jot down notes about how to both cope and survive within this carceral care surveillance assemblage, or the soccer state. And they would pass, we would all share tips, So again, it wasn't just about plotting harm, but also finding ways to get through it together. And I think that's what this domain of analysis is really helpful for. And now for the next level, the structural domain, while the algorithmic ecology and matrix sort of offer up these two different levels of microanalyses, so the community and the interpersonal, both actually emphasize the need for understanding this sort of structural piece. So Collins states that this domain organizes oppression through large-scale interlocking social institutions. And similarly, the algorithmic ecology states that these institutions uphold ideologies of power and fund, create, or otherwise influence the development and implementation of technology. And so the questions that the domain poses is on the screen here. And how this worked in our project at this domain is we were able to understand and map out the broader ecosystem of social institutions and laws involved in the use of surveillance and data collection, as well as automated decision-making systems. So this included things, and you can see some of this mapping here, but this included things like local DCFS protocols, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, philanthropic organizations, Amazon, and USC, the University of Southern California. So these structural components may have been overlooked if not for some of the guiding questions that the algorithmic ecology asked of us. And this was actually influenced directly from Stop LAPD Spying's data-driven policing work. So understanding what type of information to even seek out and who to seek it from really helped me craft a more precise California Public Records Act request, or CIPRA request, as well as a review of relevant laws. Again, this bolstered our strategies and how to understand this landscape of harm to really find crevices in which we could weaken it or resist it. And yeah, so it's not just about, knowing who is being harmed, super important, and who is causing harm. It's also important to know, though, how harm is made possible. And so that is going to be what the next couple of domains are going to dive into. And I see I'm running out of time, so I apologize. Disciplinary domain was influenced by Foucault, and as Collins described, analyzes how power relations are managed through the ways in which organizations are run. Mainly, Collins focuses on how the use of bureaucratic hierarchies aid in the regulation of labor and service provision, while necessitating the use of surveillance to ensure an orderly population of Black women. I found that it wasn't just bureaucracy and administrative burdens that were being used as a method of social control for both workers and families, but also other forms of disciplinary power that were being created through mandated data collection and surveillance processes. And these were being normalized within that structural domain, right? Those institutions. So, for example, because of laws like CAPTA, as mentioned in the last domain, social workers and caseworkers remain mandatory reporters that could face criminal charges if they refuse to engage in the surveillance of families. And so this reliance on punitive justice for child protection further entrenches the system into a carceral care sort of apparatus and creates an environment in which the state really benefits from surplus surveillance. And so this normalization of mandatory reporting processes and criminal charges arguably strengthens or really necessitates carceral care, surveillance, and this assemblage. And this is something I just am continuously thinking about. So happy to talk more about that later. Again, over time, I'm so sorry, just a few more slides. In addition to the disciplinary domain, there's also an operational domain. And this domain uniquely calls for an analysis of the technical components of the algorithms and those who use them. And so the questions posed at this level are on the screen as well. And so a brief example of how this worked in our project is we did a SIPRA request and we received back DCFS protocols, CPS protocols, some MOUs, memorandums of understanding between institution and other protocols for actuarial and automated decision-making systems, like you can see here. And we found while analyzing these and other documents is that Amazon was integral to DCFS's hotline workflow and even included sentiment analysis at one point. And for us, this raised questions about whether or not data laborers were being used to train these tools, which would require another set of strategies to fight additional forms of oppression, right? And this was not the only unique relationship we found. My analysis of, this operationalization of power showed that yes, DCFS hotline workers use sentiment analysis, but also IT workers were upkeeping the case management systems that supply data for the ADS, right? Academic researchers were informing the proxies of maltreatment that are used to build ADS, as you can see in Virginia Eubank's book. And of course, the data was being taken directly from individuals, either through in-person surveillance or through data sharing protocols. So analyzing the technical components of the algorithms really reveals an entirely different pathway for analysis with many, many nuances. And without the algorithmic ecology, we may have missed these nuances. So and last but certainly not least is the hegemonic domain, which is concerned with the ideology, culture, and consciousness. And this domain describes how practices within the matrix are justified. And these are the ideas they use to justify what they do. The central questions, again, are on the screen here. In Stoppel APD Spying's previous work, they identified specific ideologies that are used to justify the surveillance of people in Skid Row, and that included things like settler colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. But for my own analysis, adding in Patricia Hill Collins' hegemonic domain, it revealed to me a few other things, like misogynoir, racial capitalism, and quote-unquote child protection as interacting ideologies and value systems that undergird the use of algorithms and risk assessment tools by DCFS. And so here, the matrix of domination was essential in highlighting the ideologies that directly impact the experiences of Black mothers who really were describing family surveillance and separation as an extension and continuation of social control that was seen during chattel slavery and was really worsened by these misogynistic stereotypes, or what Collins refers to as controlling images. Things like the Jezebel, welfare queen, those things were all so important in upholding this sort of carceral care surveillance assemblage. We probably won't have time for this 5-minute questions, but in summary, this analytical framework from Under the Hatches really helps us to understand how what Davis, Williams, and Yang call computational correctives are not really viable solutions to this scope of harm. So stated differently, it's not just about analyzing how harm through algorithms and surveillance can be caused by biased processes or classification issues, bad data in, bad data out, but reckoning with this complex system of actors, institutions, policies, ideologies that are really driving the harm. And as Professor Haggerty states, the process of surveillance as surveillantization is an ongoing reconfiguration of visibility tied to processes of regulation and governance, one shaped by enduring struggles over power, inequality, and legitimacy. And so this tool helps to elucidate those configurations and struggles. Last thing I'll say is by using frameworks created from quote-unquote Under the Hatches, we're acknowledging and respecting that community members directly shape and lead critical research analyses and strategy. Community-created frameworks create space for grief and joy, and the building of communal consciousness, and the sharing of survival strategies. And academic researchers have to remember that the importance of partnering with and learning from community members whose wisdom comes directly from day-to-day experiences with socio-technical systems and these, algorithmic harms. And so if you have any questions, I'm so sorry I'm over. Please let me know. And thank you so much for listening to my very brief presentation. Thanks.